Hi there, and welcome back. I'm called Adrian. In this one, I'm so excited because I get to interview Dawn Lester and David Parker, who spent 10 years researching, cross referencing, and putting together an amazing book called What Really Makes You Ill: Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease Is Wrong. Now, I've wanted to interview them for a little while, and we managed to get that done today, but not without problems. We had no end of technical issues, which is unusual. I know that the internet and the systems are under a lot of load right now. We had Zoom lockout twice, completely to the point we could no longer use it. And we had Skype also lock out partway through as well. So this is not the best edit I've done. In addition, we had some weird things going on with the sound as well. That may have been my doing, I don't know. I've managed to do as much as I can in post-production to sort the sound out, but if you can bear with that, there are some real pieces of gems, if you will, in this interview. And there's some really good stuff as well where we talk about how the scientists, if you will, scientism right now reigns supreme, and it's not scientific analysis really in any way, shape, or form anymore. So we cover that ground as well. So I would encourage you, if you have a level of interest in your health, that you might want to go grab yourself a cup of your favorite beverage or a glass of it and settle back, maybe want to make some notes and just have a listen to this amazing interview. And one of the other technical problems we had, by the way, was I don't fully understand Skype because we've never really used it. So you will see me in a little tiny box in the corner, which is fine because this show is all about David and Dawn in any case. You guys are amazing. In the description of this video and in the first comment, there will be links to Dawn and David's website, and also where you can buy their book. Now that will be an affiliate link. It's not going to cost you any more, but I will make a few pennies off that, or you can buy it direct off their site, which would be probably the same link, I guess. Anyway, you guys are absolutely amazing, and I'm looking forward so much to seeing you in the next video. Enjoy this. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye. The floor is yours for the third time. Hopefully it works this time.
Okay. Right. Well, I'll start by telling you a little bit about ourselves and how we got into this, how we came to write this huge book, What Really Makes You Ill: Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease Is Wrong, which is a very challenging title, but it summarizes where Dawn and I started when we started looking at the medical system, because the other book that we were writing at the time, which was about the nature of reality, and we were writing that under a pen name called NOR, stands for the nature of reality. And we came to a chapter where we needed to find out some more information about viruses and health. And up until that time, we believed what everyone else believed, that germs of one sort or another make you ill, vaccinations are good for you, and the medical system is based on science. And we found through our research of 10 years that none of that was true, which was a great shock as we came to it. The first thing we looked at when we were looking at viruses, purely by chance, we came across the HIV/AIDS controversy. And at the time, we didn't even know it was a controversy. We just believed everything that we were told by the mainstream media and the medical establishment, that there was this new disease starting in San Francisco with a group of homosexual men, but it was now going to spread around the world and spread into the heterosexual community, and millions literally of people were going to die from it worldwide. And there was all sorts of horror stories, and the media were putting out videos of lots of tombstones, and it was horrendous. Anyone who lived through all that. So when we started looking at it, we started to find out that there were quite a lot of dissenting voices, professional people, professors and doctors and scientists, that were saying this isn't true. So we sort of thought, okay, we need to investigate this. So, cutting a very long story short, we do detail it all in our book. We were soon able to see that, in actual fact, there was no scientific evidence for a virus causing AIDS, and that the actual causes were relatively straightforward. This small community in San Francisco of homosexual men, it was to do with lifestyle. And I don't mean the fact that they were homosexual. It was nothing to do with that at all. It was to do with the fact that they used a lot of recreational drugs, in particular poppers, as they were known, which is amyl nitrate. Very toxic, but people get high on it, but it's actually extremely toxic to the body. So it was making them ill. They were then going to their doctors, who were then giving them high-dose antibiotics. So another load of toxins, which just actually made them more ill. And the doctors thought that they were looking at some new disease. So they started to treat them with other toxic drugs. The main one at the time was AZT, which was actually a chemotherapy drug. But they just thought, well, we'll try it out. As we found doctors do from time to time, just try some drug out which is sort of on the shelf. So they tried out AZT, and as we learned from other doctors, some German doctors actually, that the high dose of AZT that they were giving to people killed everyone. They all died. And this is including people like Freddie Mercury and Rudolf Nureyev, the ballet dancer, Arthur Ashe, the tennis player. So everyone who took this AZT at the dose they originally gave out, they all died. But of course it was very convenient to blame it on AIDS itself, but that wasn't the case. So we also came across for the first time the work of Kary Mullis, whose name crops up a lot now. And he's the inventor of the PCR test. And at the time, again, they were using his PCR test to supposedly diagnose whether people had got HIV or not. And he was very outspoken at saying, this is not what my test is for. It's for amplification of genetic material. It's not for diagnosing a disease. It's not for detecting whether you've got a particular virus in your system. And he was very vocal about that. But he also, like us, looked for the scientific papers to prove that a virus was the actual cause. And again, he's on public record as saying those papers don't exist, which is remarkable, considering that people like Robert Gallo have made a fortune out of it, saying that he did discover the virus, and he's sort of got the patent on the supposed treatments for it. But I'm cutting a long story short, but it's all on public record now, and we do discuss it in the book, which is a complete fallacy. There was no virus. There is no virus. The PCR test is not meant to detect it.
Is it?
No, it doesn't detect for things like that at all. But that didn't deter the establishment from using it, because it's obviously, like now with the coronavirus nonsense, it serves their purpose, but gives all sorts of false information.
Yes, there are quite a few parallels with the HIV/AIDS story with what's going on now. So I think more and more people are becoming aware of that. But certainly using a meaningless test to detect something that it's never meant to detect is certainly one of the big similarities, really.
Yeah. So that was a big wake-up call for us. We were obviously quite shocked by it. And I remember Dawn and I saying to one another, after we'd looked at this for quite some time, we went to all sorts of meetings, we met HIV positive people, we talked to discussion groups, we talked to doctors, we spent a lot of time because we could barely believe what we were finding. Because it was completely contrary to everything the medical establishment officially and the media in particular was saying, and the government. Exactly the situation we have now. But the truth is, there is no science behind it, and there is no virus behind it. So we were shocked, and we decided, well, if they were so wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? And that was the start of going down the rabbit hole.
That opens up a can of worms.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, talk about peeling away the onion layers. I mean, it's just amazing. But, we had to actually look at other diseases supposedly caused by viruses. I mean, because at the time we were looking at viruses just to see, because we kept saying, well, what about this disease? What about that disease?
And that's what we did. We thought, well, what we'll do is we'll pick on all the most popular diseases that everyone knows, whether it's tuberculosis or anything you could think of, really. But we confined ourselves to viruses to start with, but it didn't matter which one we looked at. Whenever we sort of kept digging back to find out if there was any scientific papers, any proper evidence, scientific evidence to prove that a virus was the cause of that disease, it was never there. There was never any scientific papers there, and that's true today. And it's obviously certainly true of this coronavirus. We've looked for those as well. And they're not there, and they should be. They should be a matter of public record because, as you can imagine, if someone like a Robert Gallo can actually discover some new virus or can discover the cause of a particular disease, then, it's very prestigious. There's big money in it for them. Their name goes down in medical history and they get all sorts of grant money and become very famous on it. So, they're not going to be shy at publishing those papers and making a big song and dance about it. But so, when those papers don't exist, there's something amiss. And that's what we found in every case. So as well as looking for diseases caused by viruses, we thought, well, I wonder if it's the same for sort of bacteria. And we found exactly the same. Obviously, bacteria are living things and do exist, and the human body is awash with them. They're part of normal life. And as we found, they're not antagonistic to life, they're supportive of life. And in fact, without them, there would be no life. We have them both in and on our body. They help with digestion. They're part of the cleanup mechanism in the human body. And of course, this was the first mistake back in the early days when the medical establishment, as it was, and we're going back sort of roughly 150 years, when they only had optical microscopes. And when they looked into blood samples, they could see these things, which they realized were bacteria. But when they saw them in the blood, they were clustered around any dead or dying tissue. So that was their first big mistake. They assumed that the bacteria was the cause of the dead and dying tissue, rather than realizing it was actually cleaning up the dead and dying tissue so they could be exited from the body. And we often liken it to blaming firemen for the cause of house fires, just because whenever you see a house fire, there's a cluster of firemen around it. It's just a humorous way of looking at it, but that's the mistake they made. And it sort of stuck with it, really, because at the same time, there was this burgeoning, what came to be the pharmaceutical industry of today, of people selling things that will cure you of this, that, and the other. So it was very convenient to be able to sell you something that's going to kill these bacteria. Yes, the money started to get into it, and it's quite a story to see how the pharmaceutical industry developed through the Rockefeller family, which probably people are well aware of.
Well, back to the Flexner report, that wasn't it? That's really what kind of started it off.
Yes, 1910, I think. Yes. I mean, it's important to make a distinction between bacteria and viruses. That, as David has said, bacteria are alive; they're living, whereas the what are called viruses are totally non-living particles. I mean, there is absolutely no evidence that there's anything. That they have any kind of attributes that can be described as, makes them alive. And originally the word virus is from the Latin for poison. So they were never thought of as being organisms at all. I mean, they're referred to as microorganisms, but they aren't, because an organism is something that's alive. And it's interesting to see how they're trying to, or they have tried over the decades to change the definition of virus. Originally, they were known to be non-living particles, absolutely inert. And now that definition is changing very slowly. That there was a certain stage where they were saying, they're in a grey area between living and non-living. And, and yes, exactly. So, we have to say these particles that have been called viruses, there's absolutely no evidence that they have any attributes that can describe them as alive at all in any way. So they are just non-living particles that there's no evidence that they are anything other than just cellular debris, because cells break up all the time in the body, and as they break up and they're into various parts to be eliminated. I mean, cells die all the time in the body. That's a normal process. It's a normal part of metabolism. And as the cells break up into various different sort of particles, are then eliminated out of the body. You know, that's normal. And so these particles are nothing other than cellular debris.
We often sort of, to help people get a mental image of it, we often refer to it as imagining that you dropped a pane of glass on the floor, and the pane of glass representing a cell breaks up into dozens of pieces of different sizes and shapes, and then would normally be expelled from the body. Unfortunately, a new industry came along called virology that started then to look at these broken up pieces and give them names and attributes. And we still have that today. But at no time have they been able to actually prove scientifically, choose what they might say, that any of these broken up bits and pieces actually do cause anything. You know, and as Dawn has rightly said, you know, once a cell is broken up, which is a living thing, into these bits and pieces, these are not living things, they're just fragments. And the virologists in their petri dishes, in their laboratories, have sort of just give names, and as I say, it's a myth. And it was interesting. I'm sure people have heard of Dr. Stefan Lanka, the German doctor, who is a fully trained virologist in actual fact, although he doesn't like to be called a virologist anymore, because he realizes it's just it's a fictitious, it's not a science at all, it's just a phantom. You know, they're dealing with phantoms, you know, and artifacts. But there's a lot of money made in it, of course, and it's grist to the mill for the pharmaceutical industry, who continue to make billions out of selling lotions and potions and vaccines to combat these broken bits of cellular debris, and attributing all sorts of diseases to them. And it's we're suffering from that, of course, today with the fictitious coronavirus, which, again, we've looked for the papers. Many people have looked for the papers. They don't exist. There's quite a number of doctors who've looked for the papers. I'm sure people have heard of, like, Dr. Andy Kaufman, who's a friend of ours, Dr. Tom Cowan, and others, including Stefan Lanka. We were talking to Stefan Lanka only about a week ago. And, you know, they know very well these particles are not active. They're not harmful to the body. They're just cellular debris and don't do anything. And yet we've got the whole mainstream media who know nothing really. They're just script readers, and the government who know little more really. Their strings are being pulled obviously by people behind the scenes, and there is obviously some other agenda. I mean, we know, because we've got copies of the papers, that there are many people around the world that have written to their governments and health departments, and under the Freedom of Information Act, they've asked for written proof for the existence and proof that this coronavirus actually is the cause of this disease. And in every case, and I'm talking dozens and dozens, the governmental departments or health departments have written back and say, we don't have that information, which beggars belief, doesn't it? When they openly admit they don't have it, and yet they carry on closing the world down as if they do have that information.
All based on fear. I mean, that's one of the worst things that's happening at the moment, that they're creating so much fear. And, you know, people no longer communicate with each other easily because they have to keep separate, and the masks and everything else. But it's well, I mean, we'll get to talk about, the actual causes, but I mean, fear is certainly having a negative impact on people's lives, but also on their health as well.
Like it's the currency of control.
Sorry,
Fear is the currency of control.
Yes. I mean, that's what they're using. But the point is that people are being made to fear what they think is an invisible enemy, but in fact it's a non-existent enemy. Well, it's something that doesn't exist. There is no thing called a virus that can cause any kind of ill health at all, let alone the so-called devastating effects of killing people and stuff. It just isn't. It just isn't happening.
But of course, we know, and it's one of the 4 factors that we talk about in our book that actually leads to what makes people ill, and prolonged stress is one of them. It has physical effects, not least of which is the placebo effect. Where people believe in something, or they may even believe they've got an illness, which may be starting off what normally they would have called a cold, which actually is just a detox mechanism for the body, which we explain. It's not something caused by a virus, which the medical establishment would have you believe. It's purely detox. But of course, if they're detoxing for some reason, they then now think they've probably got the starts of COVID-19. And then, of course, the placebo effect kicks in and they become worse and worse. And then that's aided and abetted, of course, by the medical establishment, who treat them as if they're some sort of leper and want to put them into isolation and possibly give them lots of very powerful antivirals, drugs which will certainly make them ill, or even put them on a ventilator, which is extremely intrusive. Yeah, I mean, at least from what we've been told by doctors in the States, 80% of people that get put on ventilators die. It's so intrusive. I mean, the people are under general anaesthetic, which probably many people don't realise. It's not just a bit of a pipe stuck up your nose. You're under general anaesthetic with something stuffed down into your lungs. I mean, it's very intrusive and very traumatic for the body, and most people die. And that's, of course, can wind up these death figures that the governments like to put out, most of which actually are fictitious, and most of which are just anybody who dies of anything gets listed as COVID. And from talking to our doctor friends in the States, of course, there is a financial incentive in the States to do exactly that. The Medicare pays X amount of $1,000 for every case that you list as COVID related, and it pays even more, something like $30,000 for every one that they put on a ventilator. So huge sums of money being thrown at this, all of which is causing lots of fictitious deaths and illnesses being attributed to COVID, none of which are. I mean, we've heard of cases. I mean, it's not so much as the financial incentives in the UK, but we know of cases of people. Well, one of the most striking, which was sort of last year, people in the UK will know of the comedians Little and Large, who used to be on the television quite a lot. And Eddie Large had suffered with a bad heart for at least 10 years. And last year, he went into hospital having a heart attack and died. And they put him down as dying from COVID, which infuriated. And this is true. This is on the records, And his colleague, the Little part of it, I don't know what his first name is.
Sid,
Yeah, Sid Little, actually went public to say, Eddie died of a heart attack, and Eddie's family said so as well. But officially, they recorded him as dying from COVID, and that's the sort of thing that's going off. And there's all sorts of stories like this, complete fiction, and shows. I mean, words start to fail you when you realise this is the establishment that are doing this. It's not some backstreet, clinic. This is the mainstream that are doing this and are going all out to lie to the public.
Well, they're relying on something which is interesting, and it's something your book, I haven't read all of it, but I've read good chunks. I actually use it now as a reference manual. I can just dive in and grab bits from it. But it's about, if you put something outside of someone and say, right, that's what's making you sick, they haven't got to take any responsibility for the fact that they've had a hand directly, indirectly, knowingly or unknowingly poisoning themselves, in their thoughts and in their physicality as well, and that's what they're dealing with the results of, and nothing else. So if people would take responsibility for themselves and get more understanding and knowledge about what's going on, they wouldn't get sick, and they'd understand that the sickness is simply them cleansing the problem out, because they're building a disease within themselves, every mouthful, every breath, everything they drink.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the key messages from the book that we try to help people realise and appreciate, is that you can take responsibility for your own health by taking responsibility for everything you put on and in your body. Now, there are certain environmental toxins, substances, influences that you can't necessarily change. But if you can minimise or certainly reduce to an absolute minimum, if not completely eliminate, the influences that you can do something about. I mean, if you can take responsibility and for what you are putting on and in your body, then you can certainly make big differences in your health. But as you say, it's your thoughts as well. Now, people may find that rather strange to say, oh, you know, your thoughts influence your health. But as we were saying before about the placebo effect, but it's also the nocebo effect, where people's thoughts can really influence them and their health to the point where they can even sort of, you know, die according to a diagnosis. I mean, it's a known phenomenon. I think it's known within the medical establishment as medical hexing. You know, certain doctors give a prognosis. I mean, the patient says, "Oh, how long have I got, doctor?" And you can get a prognosis, or, well, you know, maybe 3 months. And a number of people will absolutely take that, believe it absolutely fully, and can die according to that prognosis in 3 months. And sometimes it's been found that even on autopsy that their condition was not actually, or the pathology in their body was not so significant that it would actually have led to their death. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are people who've said, actually, doctor, no, I don't think I'll accept your prognosis, thank you very much. And they have the ability to change that particular mindset, those thought processes, and to then, not just mentally, but they can take some other actions that change how they change what they do in their lives, change their lifestyle to a certain extent, and they can make a big difference and go on to live for years despite the prognosis. So it's not necessarily that the prognosis means that's what happens, but it's how the patient actually responds, reacts, and thinks about it. And this can be quite a significant factor, which is why it's so relevant to what's going on now, that so many people have this fear and believe, you know, just the slightest snivel and cough, oh, I've got it. And then once they think they've got it, it becomes part of them, and they can really descend into the worsening health problems, and even could lead to their death as well. So, you know, this is why people need to know there is nothing to fear here. You know, there is no virus to fear.
I mean, the whole of our book, really, in a nutshell, shows that because when you think that the whole of the medical system is based on the germ theory, okay, and people forget that it is still called the germ theory, i.e. a theory is something that's not been proven, and it certainly hasn't been proven. But the whole of the medical... Sorry?
It can't be proven.
Exactly. And the whole of the medical system rests on that. And the whole of our book, if you like, 10 years of research, going back over the last 150 years, not that that's how old Dawn and I are, of course, I hasten to point out, but we research materials and other doctors and scientists over the last 150 years, which is the sort of main stay of the present medical system. And, you know, there is no proof for it. There's absolutely no proof for it. And once it's like pulling the rug from under the whole medical system, which is really what our book does. You know, and that's not what we set out to do. We just set out to find the truth. And that was the shocking thing. The truth was that the medical system is not based on science. It's based on dogma, mostly, and vested interest. And, of course, it's aided and abetted by a very profitable pharmaceutical industry, which, again, without the germ theory, their lotions and potions are completely meaningless. And even they have to admit there is nothing that they provide that cures anything. It just supposedly at best ameliorates any of the symptoms, but it can't cure anything. Well, that's not surprising. It can't cure something that doesn't exist.
But what it can do is it can cause another problem, which means another pill, which means more profit, which means another problem, and you're on that spiral then.
Exactly.
Oh, yes, it's a continuing sort of, it's a business model to make sure that people are not healthy, because healthy people aren't customers of the industry, and they want perpetual customers.
But of course, I mean, so we looked at all the sort of known diseases to try and find out if there was anything any different, and it wasn't. The same story was true for everything we looked at, whether it was supposedly viral or bacterial. And we looked back in history as well. We thought, well, let's see if it's always been this way. And we're sort of, I think, fairly well known for saying that we went back and looked at the Black Death and to see whether was that true. And there was some very interesting information came out of that. When we looked at it, we came across some work by an Irish professor, Professor Mike Bailey, in an Irish university, and he'd written a book called New Light on the Black Death. Now, by profession, he's a dendrochronologist, which is somebody who studies tree rings, which might sound a bit bizarre to people, but trees are very interesting things because some of them live to very old ages. I think the oldest one they've come across is about 5,000 years old and still living. So, and by looking at the tree rings, because long story short, by looking at the tree rings, you can tell what the Earth's atmosphere was like at any particular year. And he thought that's what he'd do. He'd have a look at what was going off around the time of the Black Death. And again, cut a long story short, what he found was that the Earth's atmosphere had become extremely polluted, very toxic. There was very potent gases like high levels of ammonia and other toxic gases, and he also then cross-checked it against ice core samples. Again, you can go back in Earth's history a long way, and they correlated. So something had been going off in the Earth's atmosphere that had made it very toxic. So he then also looked at eyewitness accounts of people that were alive at the time. And the eyewitness accounts talked about the atmosphere becoming thick and stinking and choking. These were the sorts of words that were being used. And one of the most astounding things that I saw, and quite revealing, was that the eyewitness accounts were talking about the rivers and lakes becoming polluted and the fish all floating to the surface dead. Well, obviously, that can tell you that's nothing to do with infected rat fleas, you know.
Quite.
You understand? So you knew there was something very strange going on. So, cutting a long story short, you know, it looked from what Professor Bailey was finding that, again, at that time, there was around the world a high rise in volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. And whenever you get the earth opening up, of course, all sorts of toxic gases get released. And also, strangely, which may or may not have something to do with it, the eyewitness accounts talk about a comet coming close into the Earth's atmosphere, which could also sort of release pollutants as well. So this is what we find is quite clearly empirical evidence that the Earth's atmosphere had become really poisonous and toxic, enough to be able to people were just dropping down dead in the street, you know, couldn't breathe properly, and what they did breathe was poisonous, which is a very far cry from infected rat fleas going around biting everyone. And other people who've looked at it as well, because of the rapid spread of this supposed disease, it had spread so quickly that it couldn't, the mechanisms were not there for, if they calculated, you know, if it was fleas biting people and then the disease developing, it couldn't have moved as quickly as it did. So it had to be some other vector that was. And also in recent times, archaeological digs in London were looking for what they would have found, examples of high die-off of rats, because apparently the rats were supposed to die as well from these infected fleas. And those carcasses are not there. So there was no great rat die-off, and certainly eyewitness accounts at the time. There are no reports of rat die-offs, you know, and they should have been all over the place if this was the case. So we can see it's a very different story and nothing to do with a disease at all. People were being poisoned, quite literally being poisoned through what they were breathing, or maybe even through the water they were drinking.
Yeah.
If it was killing the fish, it would certainly kill them.
Yeah.
So it was that sort of thing. So, and we also looked at animal diseases, some animal diseases, to see whether what we were finding out was true for animals too. And we found exactly the same. And one of the best known ones in the UK that we came across was, because it was peculiar to the UK, was mad cow disease, BSE. And so we looked into that. And again, we found the actual cause was nothing to do with a disease. It was to do with the government ministry, peculiar to the UK, insisted
Surely
that
not the government having its hand in something again.
Yes, I know. I know it's shocking, isn't it? You know, because they're such good guys, but unfortunately not. And they'd insisted in the UK that all cattle were dipped in what turned out to be, as we looked at it, an organophosphate dip, which was supposed to protect their hides against warble fly, which sort of makes holes in the hide, and then the hide's not worth as much money when it's sold for leather. Okay. But what made it peculiar to the UK was that the concentration of organophosphate was 4 times what was used in any other country. And its toxicity, I mean, it's toxic anyway, but at 4 times the strength, it's a neurotoxin. And that's what was actually giving the appearance of cows going mad, because they were losing all control of their limbs and bodily functions, and then were being destroyed. And obviously thousands and thousands of cattle were killed in the UK because of this, but the real reason is really caused by the government ministry itself with their ridiculous measures that they were imposing. Now, we came across a guy, a farmer, who's, Don will tell me what his name is because I always forget.
Mark Purdy.
Mark Purdy, in the UK, who had a pedigree herd of cattle, and he fought the ministry because he was not going to have these cows dipped in this toxin. And he did go to court a few times, but he won his battles, and he never had to dip his cattle. And consequently, none of his cattle ever got mad cow disease. So, again, another little adage to show that it was nothing to do with some disease floating around that was attacking cattle. And so on. And we looked at myxomatosis in rabbits and things like that. So it didn't matter where we looked, whether it was in humans or animals. Nowhere was there any scientific evidence that there was some rampant disease, either bacterial or viral, but lots of evidence to show quite sensible and easily provable reasons as to why either people or animals got ill. And probably now's a good time to say that we found all illnesses were boiled down to what we call our 4 factors. And that's lack of nutrition, and we can talk a bit more about proper nutrition. So here we're not talking about the amount of food you eat, but the nutritional value of that food. Toxic intake, that's, as Dawn had said earlier, what you put in and on your skin. EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, which affect the body's electrical system, and we can talk more about that. And then finally, prolonged emotional stress. And those 4 factors, either one or more of those 4 factors, we always found were the real cause of what was ailing people or animals for that matter. And in no cases did we ever find that there was a pathogen, a pathogenic agent to blame. So obviously we explain all these things in much more depth in our book, and that's why it's nearly 800 pages. But it gives people confidence that it turns on its head everything certainly we'd been taught, and that's why the subtitle of the book is Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease is Wrong, because that's what we found out for ourselves, and it's true for everyone else. Everything you thought you knew about disease is wrong, and the book clearly shows that. And we've got 14 pages of citations from scientific work by other doctors and scientists over the decades. It's not just something we've made up. The evidence is there, so people can check out our work. And we were very, very careful about this, and that's why it took 10 years cross-referencing everything as much as we could because it was such a mind-blowing thing to come across.
We found also that the germ theory is not just relevant to the medical establishment system, but it has consequences in other aspects of life, because certain foods are, processed foods mainly, have preservatives added to them because, to protect them from so-called bacterial decomposition and those kinds of things. So it's, as I say, it's not just within medicine that the germ theory holds sway. It's within a lot of other aspects, and certainly, like now, that's a medical system, but everyone's washing their hands. Well, not everyone. Some
Not
people
me.
are not. No, exactly. Sorry. Yes, not everyone. A lot of people are washing their hands to protect themselves in this sort of hand sanitizers. But interestingly enough, I believe they're antibacterial, which is nothing
I said that to a guy in the shop. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm buying this to stop the problem." And I went, "All right. Do you know there's a difference between viruses and bacteria?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "What does it say on the label?" And he said, "Antibacterial." And I said, "Yeah. What does that tell you?" And he said, "I need to go get some more." And I stood there aghast.
Yes, exactly, and that's one of the problems that people don't understand enough. I mean, antibiotics are used, they're used in animals as well as humans, but I mean, they're overused. But they are said to be only for bacterial diseases. Antibiotics are supposed to not work for viral diseases. So if this is supposed to be a viral disease, why are people using antibacterial hand sanitizers? But it's not, it's not just to do with health, but I mean, there are a lot of antibacterial products. I mean, surprisingly, socks, for example, is almost impossible to get socks that aren't antibacterial. On the basis that it's the bacteria that makes your feet sweat and smell. It's just completely wrong. So all of these products, it's great for the chemical industry and the products industries, but it's not just about health. I mean, this problem permeates quite a lot of aspects of life and a lot of things. It's not just the pharmaceutical industry that would have the rug pulled from under it. It's quite a lot of the chemical industry and the products that they make, all designed to stop the spread of germs. But there aren't any germs. It's toxins that we need to be worrying about.
That's exactly. I haven't seen a doctor in 30 years, which is the last time I was sick.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I haven't taken a pill in 30 years. I won't go near anything. I refuse to, because I understand how it works and what goes on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Once people understand, but they do have to take responsibility for themselves. And I think there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that idea because it means they'll have to make changes.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and that really is the key. They can't keep throwing toxins in their face and on their skin, and just say, "Well, I just want a pill to make me feel better." It's not the way.
It doesn't work.
And health is, as we say in the book, and when we talk to people, natural health is very simple. They're not complex rules. That's the natural state for human beings, is to be healthy. And all you've got to do is, as we boil it down to just 4 factors, and in particular to make sure that you eat nutritious food. We do warn people against processed food because of all the toxins and additives and colorings and preservatives that are in that sort of food. And the household products. I mean, we list in the book, as many as we can, the various areas where your body can be assaulted, if you like, by toxins.
It's not to scare people; it's to provide them with the information so that
it's knowledge and information. That's the key.
Yes.
And it's in the things they wash themselves with, they clean their floors with. There's some quite nasty toxic materials in these things.
Or even shampoo or toothpaste.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And people can change. There are alternatives. And reducing that body burden of toxins, as you rightly say, and if you know yourself, and we know, you can stay healthy. You don't have these detox mechanisms of what people think of as a cold or influenza even. Again, that's just a more severe detox system. It's quite natural for the body to do it if the toxic load in your body is built up to such a state that the body can't eliminate it in just a normal way of excretion, urination, sweating, or even extreme cases of vomiting or diarrhea. These are all natural means that the body uses to eliminate toxins.
Not bacteria. Yes, I mean, so many. Yes, the thing is of food poisoning. So food poisoning, but it's caused by bacteria. No, the clue is in the title. It's called food poisoning for a reason. There's something that's the body recognises as toxic. It doesn't mean that the food has been poisoned deliberately. It just means there's something in that food that the body has reacted to and says, get it out, and so it finds the quickest way to do so.
And if you let it run its course, it runs it completely, but when you smother the symptoms and suppress everything, it stays in the system and there's more problems.
Correct.
Oh, yes, and you get to build up towards chronic health problems. Yes, I mean, that's one of the big things to help educate people not to take something to suppress symptoms. Every time there's you get a fever, oh, you've got to bring the fever down. Inflammation, oh, you've got to take anti-inflammatories. No, even inflammation is a process of the body to a protective mechanism, because it helps to increase the supply of blood and also repair materials, so that healing can take place more quickly within an area that's been damaged in some way, and that's why it becomes inflamed.
Well, you were talking about nutrition before. I think it's important to point out that the body's ability to heal is determined by its ability to create new cells that actually work. And that requires nutrition. Raw materials. If you haven't got all the raw materials, you can't make a chocolate cake if you have no eggs, flour, and milk. It doesn't work. But what people do is say, well, I'll do this. No, you've got to get all the raw materials. And as you say, the inflammation opens the trucking system, which is the blood, to bring the raw materials in so that it's then got the raw materials.
Yes. But the body needs more raw materials. Yes, absolutely. And food is one of the best, one of the most important.
I mean, we recommend to people, again, it's nothing fancy or expensive. I mean, we do recommend a plant-based diet as much as possible. We do recommend where you can eat raw things because there's more nutrition, I mean, people would eat fruit in its natural state anyway. Green leafy vegetables. So fruit and vegetables are the best way. I mean, both Dawn and I are actually vegans, but before that we were vegetarians for many, many years.
I was vegan for 25 years, and now I do have eggs from the local farm, and occasionally I'll have some raw milk.
Right, okay. But these are nutritious foods that people, and organic, if people can buy organic as much as they can. And the only reason we say that is that because of the sort of factory farming methods, if you buy organically produced food, you're less likely to have it sprayed with chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, whatever, and that it's grown in healthy soil, because so much soil now is depleted of natural minerals and nutrients, because the plants are growing in basically chemical fertilizers. So they can look pretty good, but they'll be deficient in some of the nutrients which they need to pass on to you.
And also the bacteria that are there to do its job.
Oh yes. Need a good healthy soil. Yeah. I know some people may choose to grow their own. So the organic aspect of that, if they know how to have create a healthy soil, and they're growing their own food, they don't need to necessarily worry about the organic part of that, as long as they're not putting lots of toxic chemicals in that soil or on the plants to grow them, because it just isn't necessary. They'll do very well.
I think what's becoming apparent from this discussion as well is that it's not the whole medical industry, it seems to me, wants to separate. If you have a problem, say, in your arm, they then treat you as the arm. They don't treat you as the whole thing. And what you're saying quite correctly is that the entire systems, everything work, and they're interconnected. So nutrition's interconnected with the EMFs, it's interconnected with the other forms of toxicity, it's interconnected with stress. Everything ties together, and everyone needs to start looking at the whole in order to get a better understanding of how this whole fits together and actually it works as a piece of machinery, if you will, because that's what it is.
Well, we try to get people to think of the body as a self-regulating, self-healing organism, where all of it is an integrated system. And contrary to what the medical establishment would have us believe, that they can target with a magic bullet a drug of some sort.
Bullets, right?
Yes.
Target just one specific bit of the body.
Yeah.
Well, it's an integrated system. You put something into the bloodstream, it goes everywhere and affects everything. So there's no such thing. There's no such thing as their magic bullets, which the media like to talk about. As I say, they, I think for the most part, unknowingly lie to the public all the time. Obviously, the people who run the media, they know very well that they're lying, but the script writers, the talking heads you get on the daily news, daily propaganda, they have no idea. They're just reading a script. They're the script readers. They don't know what they're talking about. But of course, the public believe them. If it's come off the BBC or CNN or something, they think, oh, well, that's the truth. Why would they lie to us? I mean, we've had this. People say, well, why would they lie to us? Why would the government not tell us the truth? Why would well, where do we start with you, my friend? Where do we start with you? It's a long process to find out the truth, but for some of us, like yourself, who've been looking at this for years and years, you realise just how much people are lied to by the mainstream. Okay. Looks like we may have lost the network.
No, I can still hear you.
That's
excellent.
Really much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I mean, this is what building a community is all about, isn't it? Because
Exactly.
heaven knows we really need it, because the mainstream community is useless. It's destructive. So.
Well, it's there for a reason, anyway.
Yeah.
Where were we? We were talking stress, health, the entire system. One of the things I would like to cover, actually, is research. We talked about confirmation bias before we started everything. And I think that's one of the real challenges that people face, is because the mainstream do it. The medical profession are terribly guilty of this. They come up with an idea and then they go looking for the evidence to support it, instead of doing proper research, which is, what am I looking at? And let's see if we can then confirm it with other sources. I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about how you've gone about that, because 10 years is a long time to work on a project.
Yeah, it is.
It is
and
rather, yes.
much more that we never expected it to. Well, we didn't put a time scale on it. Because Dawn and I, as it went on and on, I just said, look, this is so important that we get this right, that it'll take as long as it takes, because we wanted to go down, because it was so alien to us, so totally different to everything we'd been told, and the implications of it were so far-reaching, and because we knew of terminology that we came across, such as iatrogenesis, which basically translates as death by modern medicine, really, where, in the States alone, 250,000 people a year die from this, and this is the fact where people are taking the prescription medicine that they're given by their physician, and it's killing them. Basically, that's what it is. When there's these huge numbers of people dying, which never gets reported, you think this is what on earth is happening? And of course, that's not just peculiar to America. It happens in every country that's practicing Western medicine, Western style medicine, and using the petrochemical industry's products, because that's what pharmaceutical products are. They're all based on petrochemicals. So there's an unholy union between the petrochemical industries and the pharmaceutical industries. And they're self-serving for one another and poisoning the world. So all of these things were very shocking to us, and we wanted to make sure that we were absolutely right by what we were finding. So that's really one of the reasons it took so long. We agonized over it to look in as many sources as we could to make sure there was lots of supportive evidence. I mean, that was one of the fortunate things both Dawn and my background, mine in engineering, Dawn's in accountancy, is that we were used to looking at finite detail, and we were used to making sure, as we sort of said earlier, electrically, if you get something wrong, something blows up or somebody gets electrocuted. So you have to be right. There's no second chance. You have to be right.
It's not quite so dangerous in accountancy, but
No,
yeah, I mean.
But, you've got to get the books right. The numbers have got to make sense.
Yes.
And so we're used to working with detail, and we're used to making sure things are right. And we found that set us in good stead to come up against this wall of contradictions that we came up against with what the medical establishment was saying and what the science was saying. And I do mean the true science, because we soon found out there was a lot of vested interest, not only just in the medical system, but also the science. There's lots of what came to be known as gatekeepers. And these are
Scientism, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's becoming more widely used, or widely recognised. Even though it's called science, it's scientism. So yes, there's a big difference. I mean, real science is completely open. It's a process of inquiry into the nature of something. So it starts with the question, what is this? Maybe starts with an observation. Starts with an observation, and then it's, what is it that we look, what is this observation? What does it mean? Instead of starting with an assumption, which is absolutely at the core of virology, because all you have to do is look at any paper that is discussing any particular disease, and it says this disease is caused by XYZ virus, bacterium, or whatever. The statement is made at the beginning. It's not an inquiry into the nature of the disease. It starts with an assumption. And these are the kinds of things that we were finding that made us realise that it's not true science. It's not an inquiry into what is this disease, can we learn more about it. It's only, can we find out more about the so-called pathogen that is supposed to cause this disease.
And we found this when we talked to doctors about their education as doctors. And it soon became apparent, that again they were trapped into this self-fulfilling prophecies, that it was just dogma. They were told exactly as Dawn said, this bacteria causes that disease, this virus causes that disease, and this is the treatment, It's almost learning by rote. They didn't do any original research. They were not allowed to say, well, how do you know that virus causes that disease? Where is the research paper? They weren't allowed, not if you wanted to pass your exams, And of course, as again, talking to the doctors, they're heavily invested financially in their training. And so they come out of medical school with quite a large bill, like people coming out of university, so they've got to stay in a job and they've got to pay that back. And of course they get well rewarded for their job as a doctor. So it's the golden handcuffs. So it's a very brave doctor who will come out and say, I've looked at this, and in actual fact, the medical system is not based on science at all. It's based on dogma and fear and assumptions. I mean, they soon lose their job and all that goes with it. So we found there was lots of gatekeepers, lots of vested interests. But because we had no vested interest in not being doctors, we could ask the questions, no matter how foolish they may think those questions were. And we could keep pressing until we got a sensible answer, until we could see that was backed up by actual scientific evidence and from multiple sources. And that's why the books took so long to put together, because we knew that when we released this book, it would be so controversial to the mainstream. I mean, people said, you'll never get it published, and they're surprised that it's been, we only published it Christmas of 2019, so it's just been over a year. And people are surprised that it's still on the market, that it's not got taken down. And I think the only godsend on that, if you want to say it, is that at the time we published it, no one had heard of coronavirus. It didn't reach the world stage until sort of the early part of 2020. So our book doesn't mention it. But it doesn't invalidate anything we say, because everything we say about viruses, there has never, ever been a virus proved to cause any disease, because these particles are not living things. They're just cellular debris. And that is as true today as it was when we started writing it over 10 years ago. And it's as true today as it was 150 years ago when they first
Well, that's one of the
started
interesting
looking.
things about truth, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
immortal, if you will. It doesn't change.
Yeah.
Yes.
And knowledge and information and your journey to the truth can change. I've written a book about health. Primarily, it was just notes to myself as I help people. You know, my mum died of cancer, and then my girlfriend got cancer. I decided I wouldn't lose another person close to me for that. And so I just quit doing everything and dived into it. And I found out that if you ask enough questions and you ask them and you keep at them, you can get the answers pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What I found with that is it's just an ebook because I keep learning new stuff. So when I came across yours, I incorporated some of your ideas within that and also referred to your book in there. I've also, with Dr. Jerry Tennant, with Voltages Healing, which is really interesting as well. I'm starting to rewrite some of the bits. So you can expand on the truth and the knowledge as the information keeps coming in. But the truth itself never changes.
Exactly.
No, exactly. The yes, I mean the important thing is, as far as our research was, that we tried where possible to get multiple sources.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean certain aspects, like as we were talking about with the BSE, it was fairly clear through Mark Purdy's work that the organophosphate wash was certainly the culprit, and so we didn't necessarily look for other sources,
Mm-hmm.
but the information that he provided fitted with the rest of the information, so it was like another jigsaw piece in the puzzle that helped to clear the picture. Because again, with the BSE, I mean, it's supposed to have been caused by a prion, which is something different from a virus or a bacterium. So that's why we had to look into that, because it's another so-called infectious particle, but of course it isn't. It's just it's actually something that they could refer to as a misfolded protein. Again, it's not necessarily to go into the detail, but because it was something with a slightly different label, we certainly had to look into that. And we did find some other information from other people on that supported the idea. So it's where possible, we try to look at multiple sources, not always possible, and to try and just gather the information that helped to support, if you like, we had a sort of a hypothesis that we were working towards, that, with our 4 factors, and we kept testing it. I mean, as in true science, as we were saying with science, you keep testing your hypothesis to see if it's got any cracks, shall we say, any parts that were missing. And that's why we looked at animal diseases as well as human diseases, and not just infectious diseases, chronic diseases as well. And to see, I mean, obviously they're not claimed to be caused by germs of any kind, but they're still, the medical establishment puts out a certain idea of what they're caused by and, supposed to be caused by, and how they progress and how you can sort of treat them. But we kept testing our hypothesis to see where there were any holes, if there was any information missing, and that's why it took so long, as David said. We kept looking at as many sources as possible to try and get as clear a picture as possible to put the information out, because we knew it would be challenging, and we knew people would ask us, yes, but what about? And so they're the questions that we asked ourselves and each other, to say, well, if it works for this one, yes, but, as David said, how does it work for animals? Oh, actually, we'd better have a look at that. So, we kept challenging ourselves to get a complete picture.
Because of the importance of it, as much as anything, we wanted it to be right, because we didn't want to deceive people. And we genuinely believe, and now that more doctors have come out of the woodwork, and we've talked to most of them, if not all of them, that are now agreeing with what we say. And 2 of the most prominent ones, we know that they got our book and praised it, and even recommended it to others, which is, that helps us, and it helps us know that what we've said is absolutely right, that it is backed up by science, and other scientists and doctors, people from the medical establishment who are honest enough and have done the research themselves, completely support what we've said. So that gives us a very warm feeling that we're right, and that it can really help people to take charge of their own health and to live a healthy life. Without recourse to taking lots of, or any drugs for that matter. They just don't need to do that.
I think one other important thing I've taken from this as well is you've torn apart the medical model effectively with the information you've come across. You're not medically trained. You just know how to go looking for information and how to test it against an idea to make sure it fits and then to modify things as you see fit. And that's encouraging because that means that other people with inquiring minds should also be able to make sense of stuff. And like I said to someone the other day, I've got a reasonably bright mind as well. If I look at something and it's nonsensical, it's because it's meant to be trying to deceive me. That's all. So we need to come at it from a different angle until we can make sense of it. And everyone just watching this video can do that. I would highly recommend reading that book as well. It's a big read. Reading it in sections is a really good way of doing it, or like I've been doing. I refer back to it. Someone asks me a question, I think I'll check that first, then I can go off and do my research for it.
Yeah. That's, because our book is also available as a Kindle version, of course, once you've got it on the computer as a Kindle version, you can search it, so you can put in keywords. So it's great. It's great for that, when you want to search it. I mean, the contents pages, there's quite a few of them, as I'm sure you can see. But of course, it can't give you the detail that you can when you search it on Kindle. So nicely, we find people get both. People like to buy a book because they like a book. And particularly, people like us who are sort of old-fashioned, you like a book. But the Kindle version is very useful for research because you can put in any word you like, because we often get asked about STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, and we get asked about that all the time. And so it's nice and easy for people to just put in STD and, all the information will come up.
Yes, I know some people have said, why isn't there an index? But we were somewhat restricted by the page number, by the number of pages we could include.
The index would be bigger than the book.
Well, I was going to say yes, to have had an appropriate index, that would have been useful for people. As you say, would have taken far too many pages. We felt that it was more important to put reference sources. So there's, almost 40 pages of references listed by chapters. So within each chapter, you can go back to the reference section and have a look at all the sources there, and that gives people more information to look into to dive further. I mean, when we were sort of putting it together, we often said to each other, we could have written a book on each particular chapter, so that could have been a series of 10 books, but that would have been too much. We wanted one book that was comprehensive, that gives people enough of a picture to understand what health is really about, and why everything you thought you knew about disease is wrong, and to justify that particular subtitle, but to give people the information so that they can make truly informed decisions. It's not to tell people what to do, but it's provide them with the information, and then they can sort of look at it, go deeper if they want to, but at least take responsibility for their own health, and to realise that they can be healthy. Health is natural. It doesn't rely on lotions and potions.
In fact, lotions and potions quite often are part of the problem.
Yes,
absolutely. Exactly.
And as you said earlier, once they start themselves on that track, one potion leads to another potion, and you end up with a pharmacy in your bathroom cabinet, and so many people that actually happens to, and it's totally unnecessary.
Well, I noticed something. I started intermittent fasting over a year ago, and I've always been good about trying to detoxify myself. And then I started drinking distilled water back in probably 3 months ago, and I drink now about 5 or 6 liters a day. And I never used to drink that much water anyway, but I just really like the water. But it's interesting. What I've found is that as I go through that process, the elimination of, and I shouldn't have that much toxins in me because I went vegan nearly 30 years ago, and I'm careful about what I eat. But even as recently as just a month back, getting rid of stuff that smells of petrol and chemicals and oils and weird things coming out of my skin even now. So it shows you just how polluted we become just by being exposed to living, even when you're careful.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
And that's
interesting that you mentioned the point about water, because that's something we talk about in the book, and the importance, particularly in the UK, I guess it's the same worldwide, because the water that comes out of your tap is far from clean.
Wow.
I mean, they add chemicals, I mean, chlorine, fluoride, and even ammonia now they've started adding around our area. I don't know how widespread it is. And that's all the other stuff that's in there, at the filtration stations, they don't get everything out there anyway. So there's pharmaceutical products in there. So really we recommend to people to have either a little distiller or a reverse osmosis system. It's worth the initial outlay. So at least you can be drinking clean water. You're not continuously poisoning yourself.
And that to me that has been the single biggest impact on my health, because we're primarily water. Trusted water, if you will. So once you start to get really good quality clean water in, and it's got a strong negative charge, which the distilled water does, it can then start to pull out the junk which has been placed in your body for safekeeping wherever it can place it, because it's unable to get rid of it. So I've noticed, lumps under my skin, under one of my armpits. I had a lump for years. It had got smaller over the years, but it's still been there. It was about the size of a lime. Within a month of drinking the distilled water, it's gone. And yet it's been there for 20 years. My eyesight's improving. There's all sorts and I think one of the things I mentioned about your book as well, which I've not covered yet, it's not a technical read for people. It's written in very simple, clear, easy to understand language. And I wouldn't let anyone be put off by the size of it. It's there because it's got a lot of information.
Yeah.
But people really should get into it, I think.
We work thank you for that. Because we work very hard to keep the jargon out of it. We had to slave over all sorts of technical papers and technical books. And so it's basically, we did the work so you don't have to as the reader. And we've really tried hard to keep the jargon out of it. And from the feedback from yourself and from the amount of people that write to us from around the world, we feel we've been successful in making it. It's a big read, as you say, but you can read it. It's understandable to the general reader. We've not dumbed it down, but we've made it as easy to understand as we possibly can. So that in itself took quite a lot of work to do that.
I can imagine it's enormous, because I look at medical papers and scientific papers, and I do a lot on common law and stuff. Yeah, so I read a lot of technical stuff too, and I look at it sometimes and think, why do you have to make this so complex? Why can't you just say it in nice, clean, simple, easy to understand language? So I've got to sit here with a map and a piece of paper trying to figure out what you're actually talking about. Yeah, but anyway, so you've done a great book. We could probably talk for hours, but I'm going to be very respectful of your time. I'll put a link to the book in the video. As I said, also, I'll edit something together and send you a copy across so you can place that. Is there anything that you'd like to finish off with and tell people? I would recommend anyone, if you've not read this book, get it. The Kindle version in particular is great because it's searchable, but I would maybe think about the paper version because devices might not always work.
Exactly.
Well, yes, there is that.
And there is always the worry that electronic versions of anything, particularly as some years ago Google was putting it out that they wanted to try and make all books electronic. Now, being Google and wanting to do something like that, I'm immediately suspicious because electronic things can always be altered. We can see that from things like Wikipedia, where your view of reality starts to be manipulated. So,
very manipulated by Wikipedia.
So having a good hard copy of something and keeping it is always a good recommendation. So, but useful as Kindle versions are, grab a hard copy because we can't guarantee what an electronic version might be in years to come. People can go to our site at reallymakesyouill.com. There's quite a bit of information on there. We put up articles every now and again that people can read for free. And of course our videos, interviews go up there so people can listen to us if they wish.
Watch and listen, sometimes audio, sometimes video,
sometimes
variety.
they're just podcasts.
Yeah. Well, this one should be interesting because what people won't realise is when they watch this, we had all sorts of technical issues several times, but I think we got there in the end.
Okay, well, we'll rely on your expertise to stitch it all together, and
oh gosh.
and thank you for giving us the time to come on and
well,
talk
likewise,
to
I
you.
really appreciate it.
So, Okay, well, I guess we'll leave it at that for now, and maybe we get to chat again sometime in the not too distant future.
I would be delighted, and stay well, both of you, and keep doing what you do. The world needs you both.
Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.